Jake Thompson pushed his squeaky cleaning cart down the dimly lit corridor of Orbital Peace Station. The third shift was always the quietest time, when most of the diplomats and alien delegates were either sleeping or doing whatever their species did during rest cycles. Jake had been working these night hours for 3 years now, and he knew every corner of the massive station. As he rounded the bend toward Supply Bay 7, he heard something unusual. A soft whimpering sound, like someone trying not to cry. Jake slowed his cart and listened carefully. The sound was coming from inside the supply bay, which should have been empty at this hour. He opened the heavy door and peered inside. There, sitting on a pile of storage crates, was one of the most important beings on the entire station. Prince Kelvar of the Crystal Empire looked nothing like the proud royal Jake had seen in the news feeds. The young alien's normally glowing skin was dim and flickering like a dying light bulb. His 4 thin arms were wrapped around his legs, and his large eyes were filled with tears that sparkled as they fell to the metal floor. But what really caught Jake's attention were the prince's feet. The alien was wearing standard human gravity boots, the kind everyone had to wear in this section of the station. The boots were designed for human feet, with simple cloth laces that needed to be tied. For humans, it was as easy as breathing. But Prince Kelvar's delicate fingers, evolved for manipulating crystal technology, were shaking as he tried again and again to make the laces work. Jake watched for a moment as the prince fumbled with the strings. Each failed attempt seemed to make him more upset. The laces would slip through his fingers, or he would pull too tight and the knot would fall apart. It was clear he had been trying for a long time. The janitor had 2 choices. He could quietly back out of the room and pretend he never saw anything. After all, this was Prince Kelvar, heir to one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy. Jake was nobody special, just a guy who cleaned floors and emptied trash cans. The smart thing would be to leave the prince alone with his struggle. But Jake had never been one to walk away from someone who needed help. It didn't matter if they were human or alien, rich or poor. His mother had raised him to lend a hand when he could, and that lesson had stuck with him through his 42 years of life. He cleared his throat softly so he wouldn't startle the prince. "Hey there, need some help with those?" Prince Kelvar's head snapped up, his eyes wide with surprise and shame. His skin flashed bright red, the alien equivalent of a blush. I did not hear you approach," he said in perfect English, though his voice carried the musical quality of his species. "Sorry about that," Jake said, parking his cleaning cart by the door. "Didn't mean to sneak up on you. It's just, well, those boots can be tricky if you're not used to them." The prince looked down at his feet, his shoulders sagging with defeat. "These primitive bindings are beyond my understanding," he whispered. "I have been attempting to master them for over an hour. My tutors will be most displeased if I cannot perform such a simple task." Jake could hear the frustration and embarrassment in the young alien's voice. He remembered his own kids struggling with shoelaces when they were little. His daughter Amy had cried for weeks before she finally got it right. His son David had gotten so angry he threw his shoes across the room more than once. "Mind if I sit down?" Jake asked, gesturing to a nearby crate. Prince Kelvar nodded silently, making room on his crate. Up close, Jake could see that the alien's hands were actually trembling from exhaustion. His fingers had small cuts where the rough laces had scraped against his soft skin. "You know," Jake said conversationally as he settled down next to the prince, "when my kids were learning to tie their shoes, they thought it was impossible too. My daughter used to tell me that shoelaces were invented by evil wizards to torture children." Despite his distress, Prince Kelvar's mouth twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Your offspring faced similar challenges with these devices." "Oh yeah," Jake chuckled. "Took months before either of them got the hang of it. And they had human fingers, which are made for this kind of thing. You're working with a whole different setup there." Jake gestured to the prince's 4 delicate hands. "But that just means we need to find a way that works for you. Mind if I take a look?" Jake knelt down in front of Prince Kelvar and gently took one of the gravity boots in his weathered hands. The prince watched nervously as Jake loosened the laces completely, giving them a fresh start. "All right, let's forget everything you've been trying so far," Jake said with a reassuring smile. "We're gonna start from scratch with a method that might work better for your hands." He held up the 2 laces, making sure the prince could see clearly. "First thing we need to do is make what I call the foundation. Cross the laces over each other, like this." Jake demonstrated slowly, his thick fingers moving deliberately so Kelvar could follow every movement. The prince leaned forward, his large eyes studying Jake's technique intently. "Your movements appear different from the instructional videos I observed," he noted. "That's because those videos were made for people with 2 hands and 5 fingers each," Jake explained. You've got 4 hands with different kinds of fingers. We need to use that to your advantage, not fight against it. Jake guided 2 of the prince's delicate hands to hold the laces. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Instead of trying to do everything with just 2 hands like humans do, you can use your other hands to help steady things. As they worked together, Jake noticed how the prince's translator device occasionally made little beeping sounds, struggling to convert Jake's casual speech into the formal language the alien was used to. Loop, swoop, and pull, Jake said slowly, demonstrating each word with his actions. Think of it like a dance. First, you make a loop with this lace. He showed the prince how to create a small circle with the string. Now comes the swoop part. Take the other lace and wrap it around the back of the loop, like it's giving the loop a hug. Prince Kelvar tried to copy the movement, but his unfamiliar fingers fumbled with the laces. The loop collapsed and the strings tangled together. His skin flickered with frustration again. It's okay, Jake said calmly, untangling the mess without any sign of impatience. My son David threw his shoe at the wall the first 50 times he tried this. You're doing better than he did. Truly? The prince asked, hope creeping into his voice. Absolutely. Want to know a secret? Jake leaned in conspiratorially. The first time I tried to teach him, I got so confused trying to explain it that I forgot how to tie my own shoes. Had to ask my wife to remind me. This actually made Prince Kelvar laugh, a sound like tiny bells ringing. A most amusing image, he said. They tried again, with Jake patiently guiding each of the prince's 4 hands to different parts of the process. Use this hand to hold the base steady, he instructed. This one can grip the loop. These 2 can handle the wrapping part. As they worked, the prince grew quieter, more focused. After several attempts, he managed to create something that almost looked like a proper knot. My tutors say your species is simple, Kelvar whispered suddenly, his voice filled with shame. He couldn't meet Jake's eyes as he spoke. They tell me that humans lack the intelligence for complex thought, that your technology is primitive, your methods crude. Jake paused in his demonstration, considering the prince's words carefully. He'd heard similar opinions from some of the other alien species on the station. It used to bother him, but over the years he'd learned not to take it personally. Maybe, Jake chuckled, continuing to work with the laces. But simple ain't always bad, kid. Sometimes simple gets the job done. He gestured around the supply bay. See all this equipment? Half of it was designed by humans. The air you're breathing, the gravity keeping us on the ground, the lights letting us see what we're doing. All human engineering. We might not have crystal technology or telepathic communication, but we know how to solve problems. Jake successfully completed the knot and held up the boot. And sometimes the simplest solutions are the best ones. Your people probably have some fancy machine that could tie these laces instantly, right? Prince Kelvar nodded. Advanced molecular manipulators could bind the fibers in 0.3 seconds. Exactly, Jake said. But what happens when that machine breaks down? Or when you're somewhere that doesn't have advanced technology? Then what do you do? The prince looked thoughtful. I would be unable to secure my footwear. But now you're learning a backup plan, Jake pointed out. A simple, reliable method that works anywhere, anytime, with nothing but your own hands. That's not primitive thinking. That's smart thinking. Prince Kelvar looked at the tied boot with new understanding. I had not considered this perspective. Your turn to try, Jake said, handing him the other boot. Remember, loop, swoop, and pull. And don't worry if it takes a few tries. Over the following weeks, Jake's cleaning route mysteriously began taking longer around Supply Bay 7. He found himself inventing reasons to organize storage containers that were already perfectly arranged, or to polish surfaces that didn't really need polishing. The truth was, he had started looking forward to these late-night encounters with Prince Kelvar. Every night around the same time, Jake would find the young aliens sitting in their usual spot, gravity boots in hand, practicing the techniques they had worked on together. Sometimes Kelvar would have made progress, managing to tie one boot completely before Jake arrived. Other nights, the prince would be sitting there with tangled laces, looking frustrated but determined to keep trying. Evening, Your Highness, Jake would say casually, setting down his cleaning supplies. He had learned that formal titles made the prince uncomfortable, but completely ignoring his royal status seemed wrong too. Good evening, Jake, Kelvar would reply, and Jake could hear the genuine warmth in the alien's musical voice. I have been practicing the loop technique you showed me. I believe I am improving. Jake would settle down beside him, sometimes bringing an extra cup of coffee from the break room. He had discovered that Prince Kelvar was fascinated by human beverages, though the caffeine had no effect on his alien physiology. As the nights passed, their conversations grew beyond just shoelace tutorials. Prince Kelvar began sharing stories about his home world, Kristara, describing cities that grew like living things from the planet's surface, their walls made of singing crystal that responded to thought and emotion. He told Jake about floating gardens that existed in zero-gravity chambers, where plants from across the galaxy grew in impossible spirals of color and light. "It sounds beautiful," Jake said one night, genuinely impressed by the prince's descriptions. "Like something out of a fairy tale." "It is magnificent," Kelvar agreed, but there was sadness in his voice. "Yet I find myself preferring these quiet moments here, in this simple storage room with its metal walls and artificial lighting." Jake looked around at the plain, utilitarian space. "Really? This place over crystal cities?" "Here, I do not feel the weight of expectation," the prince explained. "On Kristara, every action, every word, every thought is measured against the standards of perfection my lineage demands." It was during one of these conversations that Prince Kelvar opened up about the real pressure he faced. "Father expects perfection in all things," he confided, his skin flickering with distress. "I must speak perfectly, move perfectly, think perfectly. I must represent our empire without flaw. But I cannot even master your basic footwear." Jake was quiet for a moment, considering his response. He had learned that the prince needed honest conversation, not empty reassurances. "You know what I think," he finally said. "Perfection's overrated." Prince Kelvar looked at him with surprise. "How can perfection be overrated? It is the highest achievement possible." "Is it though?" Jake asked, picking up one of the gravity boots. "Let me tell you about my daughter, Amy. She's a nurse now, works at the children's hospital back on Earth. When she was learning to tie her shoes, she was terrible at it. Absolutely awful. It took her months longer than other kids her age." Jake began demonstrating a double knot technique, his movements slow and deliberate. "But you know what? Because it was so hard for her, she really understood the process. When she finally got it, she could teach other kids better than anyone. She knew every mistake they might make because she had made them all herself." The prince watched intently as Jake's fingers worked through the more complex knot pattern. "Your daughter's imperfection became strength." "Exactly," Jake said. "Now she's one of the best nurses in her department." "Why?" "Because she remembers what it's like to struggle. She has patience with people who are having a hard time. Perfect people often can't relate to folks who are still learning." Prince Kelvar attempted the double knot, using the four-handed technique they had developed together. His first try was clumsy, the second better, and by the third attempt, he had managed something that would actually hold. "The important thing," Jake continued, "isn't being perfect right away. What matters is not giving up. Every night you come here and try again. That's not failure, that's determination. That's the kind of quality that makes a good leader." "You truly believe this?" Kelvar asked. "I know it," Jake said firmly. "I've worked on this station for 3 years. I've seen diplomats from dozens of species. The ones who get things done aren't the ones who never make mistakes. They're the ones who learn from their mistakes and keep moving forward." As the weeks continued, Jake noticed changes in Prince Kelvar beyond just his improving knot-tying skills. The young alien seemed more confident, more willing to ask questions instead of pretending to understand everything. He laughed more easily and didn't flinch when he made errors. One night, Kelvar surprised Jake by bringing his own beverage to share, a crystalline drink that tasted like liquid starlight and made Jake feel like he could hear colors. "This is friendship," Jake realized, looking at the alien prince who had become genuinely dear to him. Emperor Thane sat alone in his private chambers aboard the Crystal Empire's flagship, staring at the holographic display that showed security feeds from Orbital P Station. His long, elegant fingers drummed against the armrest of his crystalline throne as he scrolled through the recordings from the past several weeks. What he was seeing made his luminescent skin flicker between confusion and rage. There, on screen after screen, was his son. His heir. The future ruler of one of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations. And he was sitting on storage crates in a maintenance bay, talking and laughing with a human janitor. At first, Emperor Thane had been furious. When his security advisors had brought him the initial reports, he had assumed it was some kind of mistake. Surely Prince Kelvar wouldn't lower himself to associate with such a primitive being. Humans were useful, certainly, they made adequate labors and had some basic technical skills, but they were hardly suitable companions for royalty. The Emperor had planned to immediately summon his son and put an end to this embarrassing situation. But something had stopped him. Perhaps it was curiosity, or maybe just the desire to understand how his carefully educated heir could make such a poor decision. So instead of acting right away, Thane decided to watch. To study these interactions and understand what was happening. Night after night, he observed the recordings. He watched the human, Jake Thompson, according to the station records, patiently working with Prince Kelvar on what appeared to be some kind of primitive binding technique for footwear. The Emperor found himself leaning forward, studying the human's methods with growing fascination. Thane had seen his son struggle with many lessons over the years. The prince's tutors were the finest in the Empire, brilliant scholars who had mastered every aspect of Crystalline knowledge. Yet despite their expertise, Prince Kelvar had always seemed tense during his lessons, afraid to make mistakes, constantly seeking approval that never seemed to come. But here, in this simple storage room, something was different. The prince was relaxed. He was asking questions without fear. When he made errors, he didn't flinch or apologize frantically. Instead, he simply tried again, often with what appeared to be a smile on his face. The Emperor watched one particular recording where Prince Kelvar had obviously failed at his task multiple times. His hands were shaking, his skin was dim with frustration, and tears were forming in his eyes. Thane expected the human to show irritation or impatience. This was how teachers typically responded to repeated failure. Instead, Jake simply untangled the laces and said something that made the prince laugh. The human's voice was calm and encouraging as he demonstrated the technique once more. There was no criticism, no disappointment, no suggestion that the prince was inadequate. Just patient guidance and what appeared to be genuine care. This confused Emperor Thane deeply. In Crystalline culture, teachers maintained their students' respect through demonstration of superior knowledge and occasional stern correction. Weakness was addressed through rigorous discipline. Failure was met with analysis of inadequacy and intensive remedial instruction. But this human's approach was entirely different. He built up instead of tearing down. He celebrated small victories instead of focusing on remaining deficiencies. He shared stories of his own struggles and those of his offspring, normalizing the learning process instead of treating it as a test of worthiness. Most remarkably, it was working. As the days passed, Emperor Thane could see his son growing more confident. Prince Kelvar's posture was straighter, his voice was stronger, and his skin glowed with healthy luminescence instead of the dim anxiety that had plagued him for years. During one recorded conversation, Thane heard his son express ideas that surprised him. Prince Kelvar spoke about the value of persistence over perfection, about learning from mistakes rather than avoiding them. These were concepts that no Crystalline tutor had ever taught, yet they seemed to resonate deeply with the young prince. The Emperor found himself watching Jake Thompson with new interest. This human showed qualities that Thane had always associated with advanced species: patience, wisdom, the ability to nurture potential in others. Yet according to every assessment the Empire had made, humans were supposed to be simple, crude beings focused only on basic survival and primitive pleasures. But here was evidence that contradicted those assumptions. This maintenance worker displayed emotional intelligence that exceeded many of the Empire's most educated citizens. His teaching methods produced results that the finest Crystalline instructors had failed to achieve. For the first time in his long reign, Emperor Thane began to question his civilization's fundamental beliefs about other species. If they had been wrong about humans, if beings they had dismissed as lesser could possess such wisdom, what else might they have been wrong about? The revelation was both humbling and terrifying. It meant that the Crystal Empire's entire worldview might need to be reconsidered. The main conference hall of Orbital Peace Station had never seen such tension. Representatives from dozens of worlds sat around the massive circular table, their translators working overtime as heated arguments filled the air. The peace negotiations that had been going on for months were falling apart, and everyone knew it. At the center of the dispute was humanity's role in the proposed Galactic Alliance. Most of the advanced species wanted humans to serve as laborious and soldiers, useful, but clearly inferior beings who should be grateful for any inclusion at all. The human delegates had walked out twice already, and it looked like they were about to leave for good. Ambassador Rodriguez from Earth stood up slowly, his face showing the exhaustion of someone who had been fighting this battle for too long. "I think we're done here," he said quietly. "It's clear that humanity will never be seen as anything more than a servant species to most of you." Murmurs of agreement came from the other human representatives. They began gathering their documents, preparing to abandon the negotiations entirely. Several alien delegates looked pleased. They had never wanted humans as equals anyway. That's when Prince Kelvar surprised everyone by rising from his seat. The young alien had been quiet throughout most of the negotiations, sitting beside his father and speaking only when directly addressed. Most delegates had dismissed him as inexperienced, just another royal heir learning diplomacy by observation. But now he stood with a confidence that hadn't been there before. "If I may address the council," Prince Kelvar said, his voice carrying clearly across the large room. His gravity boots were tied perfectly, the laces forming neat, symmetrical knots that showed hours of practice. His posture was straight, his skin glowing with healthy luminescence, and his four hands were steady as he gestured to the assembly. Emperor Thane looked up at his son with surprise. This wasn't part of their planned strategy. The Crystal Empire had intended to support the majority position, humans as useful but subordinate members of the Alliance. But something in his son's manner made the Emperor remain silent, curious to see what would happen. "I have spent considerable time on this station," Prince Kelvar continued, his translator working smoothly as his words reached every delegate in their own language. "I have observed many species, learned about different cultures, and witnessed various forms of leadership and wisdom." Ambassador Rodriguez paused in packing his briefcase, intrigued despite his frustration. Other delegates shifted in their seats, wondering where this was going. "During my time here, I encountered a human who works the night shift," the prince said. "A maintenance worker who cleans floors and empties waste containers. By our traditional measures, he should be among the least significant beings on this station." Some of the alien delegates exchanged knowing looks. This seemed to be heading toward the expected conclusion, humans in their proper place as servants. But Prince Kelvar's next words surprised them all. "This human taught me something that none of my advanced tutors, with all their knowledge and sophisticated methods, had ever managed to convey. He showed me what true strength looks like." The room grew quieter, delegates leaning forward to hear better. "When I struggled with a simple task, he did not mock my inadequacy or demonstrate his superiority. Instead, he sat beside me and patiently helped me learn. When I failed repeatedly, he did not grow frustrated or dismissive. He shared stories of his own children's struggles, making me understand that difficulty is part of growth, not a sign of weakness." Prince Kelvar walked slowly around the table as he spoke, making eye contact with delegates from different worlds. "This human taught me that true leadership comes not from standing above others and pointing out their flaws. True leadership comes from those who lift others up, who see potential where others see problems, who build confidence instead of tearing it down." Emperor Thane felt something shift inside him as he listened to his son. These were not just words, they were beliefs that had been tested and proven through experience. "The human janitor Jake Thompson showed me more about effective leadership in a few weeks than I had learned in years of formal education," the prince declared. "He did this not through advanced technology or superior genetics, but through patience, kindness, and wisdom." The room was completely silent now. Even the human delegates had stopped packing and were listening intently. "If we dismiss humanity as a lesser species, we blind ourselves to the very qualities that make civilizations truly great," Prince Kelvar continued. "We lose the chance to learn from beings who understand that real strength comes from helping others succeed, not from proving your own superiority." Emperor Thane slowly rose from his seat, his decision crystallizing in his mind. He had watched his son transform from an anxious, struggling heir into a confident leader. And it had happened through the influence of a simple human janitor who saw potential instead of problems. "The Crystal Empire hereby supports full equality for humanity in this alliance," Emperor Thane announced, his words carrying the weight of his vast civilization. "My son speaks wisdom that I am only now beginning to understand. Perhaps it is time we all learned from those we have too quickly dismissed."